Breaking news exclusively from Blue Eye Media. And now from our global friendly partners.
Breaking news this morning, Donald Trump has announced that he will be sending the United States military on American soil against American citizens, authorizing, quote, full force in the process. This is a moment of reckoning for the United States of America and a moment of reckoning for the United States media, because this cannot be normalized. Take a minute and imagine if President Biden or President Obama or even President Bush sent in the United States military and authorized, quote, full force against American civilians on American soil, causing chaos within the country. What would the reaction from the media be? It would be to hold the leaders accountable. But with Donald Trump, we've seen far too often that this media just refuses to hold him accountable because they are afraid. This morning, Donald Trump on Truth Social posted a short message to the public saying that he's directing Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to provide all necessary troops to protect war-ravaged Portland and any of our ICE facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists. He went on to say, I am also authorizing full force if necessary. So take a minute and let that sink in for a second. Full force against American civilians. Full force is undefined by the President of the United States. Full force could mean essentially deploying American citizens or American military personnel against American citizens to conduct law enforcement activities, which would be a significant departure from what he has done thus far. Let's talk about that, because we need to take a step back and really look at whether what he is doing is lawful under the United States Constitution and under his powers as President of the United States of America. So essentially, in the United States, there is something called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. That piece of legislation restricts the federal military forces or the use of the federal military in enforcing domestic law. The core purpose of Posse Comitatus is to prevent United States presidents from wielding the United States military as a domestic police force. Trump's directive, while it is vague, appears to flirt directly with violating Posse Comitatus. There are legal mechanisms, such as the Insurrection Act, that would allow the use of the military domestically, but Trump's sweeping language of full force raises serious constitutional alarms because right now, without legal grounding, the move risks eroding the guardrails that separate the United States military from partisan or authoritarian use. And within Pentagon circles, within the Department of Defense, according to reports this morning, they don't know what full force actually means. And we also don't know what the full scope of this deployment is. But if you know anything about Donald Trump, it's that on the weekends, he likes to make these very loud and essentially grandiose statements. He declared war against Chicago either a couple weekends ago. Now he's declaring war against Portland. He had never actually sent troops into Chicago. The White House realized that they didn't have the legal authority to mobilize the National Guard and send in the United States military into Chicago. And I actually expect that you may see something similar with Portland, where Donald Trump authorizes full force, whatever that means. You don't actually get anything close to full force. You don't actually get United States military against American civilians on Portland soil. But that's not to say that what the president is doing in this announcement is not dangerous in and of itself. And that's not to say that the mainstream media, when covering it, can't normalize this activity. The media is going to say, well, Donald Trump announced troops to Portland. Donald Trump says he's going to allow full force in these troops to Portland. No. The headlines needs to be Donald Trump authorizes the use of the military against American civilians. Donald Trump authorizes, quote, full force against American civilians on American soil. That needs to be the headline in this moment, because if we normalize this activity, then Portland may be the first, but it's not going to be the last. Seattle may be next. then he may actually go into Chicago, Memphis, New York City, Oakland, and Democratic cities across the country. And this isn't a partisan issue. This is an American issue. American civilians should not have to fear having the United States military turned against them. And legally speaking, the United States military can't turn against them. And if it does, without Donald Trump essentially invoking the Insurrection Act or taking some serious step here legally, well, then it's up to the United States military service members to reject their orders and say, you know what, sir, we are not going to do this. We are not going to allow the President of the United States to use the United States military as his personal police force. And that right there is what the founding fathers of the United States wanted to prevent, the use of the military against its own citizens. Now, local law enforcement is saying we don't want this. Portland officials, including Mayor Keith Wilson, have warned against the influx of federal agents, recalling past clashes between local communities and federal law enforcement. Local law enforcement saying that community trust and de-escalation are critical tools in maintaining order. A military presence, particularly framed in terms of war and domestic terrorists, could only inflame an unrest and deepen divisions. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have more police force in Portland or we shouldn't protect federal buildings. I'm not saying any of that. That's not what this is about. What this is about is whether or not the military should be the one doing that and whether or not American civilians should experience full force from the United States military, because such ambiguity not only endangers civilians, but also puts service members in an almost impossible position right now, caught between following presidential orders and upholding the Constitution. And perhaps the most troubling part here is the precedent that this sets. The United States has long distinguished itself from authoritarian states by the subordination of the military to democratic rule and the protection of civil liberties in our nation. And a president using active duty troops as domestic enforcers would completely blur this line. If normalized, future presidents, regardless of party, could feel empowered to deploy the military against political opponents, protest movements, or even governments that resist federal policy. This is a slippery slope toward authoritarian governance. And Trump's statement is not just rhetoric. It signals a willingness to override constitutional protections and unleash federal force on American soil in a way unseen in modern times. Even if this plan stalls or is moderated by internal resistance within the Pentagon, the danger lies in the precedent and in the public's potential normalization of such extraordinary measures. This is a moment that demands vigilance from Congress, from the courts, and from you, the American people. The use of full force against United States citizens cannot be allowed to become the new normal in our nation. As always, subscribe to support my work, and I'll see you soon.
Follow Blue Eye Media for exclusive insights and breaking news sources from global-friendly outlets that you'll never get from the mainstream cable TV and antenna radio or satellite outlets. Learn how to play the flute of the world and learn the real facts.